What's up, guys? Connor O'Hanlon here for another episode of the Greater Society podcast. And today we have a lot of news. I don't know if you guys heard what may or may not have happened over the last week, but there has been a few things, of course, that we might have to address here with Tucker Carlson being fired from Fox News, with Joe Biden announcing his second campaign for, well, maybe not his second campaign, his re-election campaign for the presidency, and Don Lemon also being fired. There's a lot of stuff going on here. But first, I am joined today by the CEO and founder of the Super Age, which Bradley Schurman will surely introduce and make you guys understand a lot more, but he is also the author of The Super Age, Decoding Our Demographic Destiny. Bradley, thank you for joining, and I appreciate the decor in the back with Honus Wagner. We were discussing before. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Connor.
So, the first thing I always ask people is to introduce themselves, go a little bit deeper into the background of your work, and then also kind of what got you involved with political action and engaging in this realm. So, floor is yours.
Yeah, sure thing, man. I'm a native son of Pittsburgh, so I grew up there from 1977 until 1996 when I left for college in DC. And it was during my college years that I really became interested in demographic change, primarily the aging of our population, because my grandparents were in long-term care in Western Pennsylvania, and I thought that the system sucked and it wasn't fair. And these were people who grew up not having much. My grandfather was born into the coal fields of Western Pennsylvania. He served his country during the Second World War. He worked for Westinghouse for all of his life. My grandmother was an elementary school teacher. They scrimped and saved. They ended up pretty good, and there were still massive holes in the system. And I thought there was something wrong with that. So I went into advocacy around making sure that older adults were more secure in their retirement years, working first for a trade association that represented long-term care, and then for the American Association of Retired Persons, better known as AARP, the 800-pound gorilla in Washington, D.C. My focus really has been on demographic change and what that means for the greater society, the body politic, and the economy. And I've spent my time post-ARP writing this book, The Super Age, Decoding Our Demographic Destiny, and building out a consultancy that focuses on strategic foresight, which is to some degree future telling, as well as inclusive design. And within strategic foresight, just to give a top line readout on that, I take large amounts of data, birth rates, death rates, and everything else in between. I overlay emerging taste trends and technologies. And then I put a lens on history onto my analysis because the past can sometimes be prologue. And as Mark Twain often said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
I think that's a great way of looking at it. And I don't know if you meant to say it's for the greater society, but fits pretty well with the show you're on.
I didn't get paid for that. I didn't get paid for that.
I have to use that as a advertisement there. um, but that is largely a piece of like what we talk about on the show is connecting to history, to politics, to current events, to all these different things. So um, I'm gonna ask. I have two different questions diverging from what you just said there, but let's talk about first like what the system looks like right now and kind of why you feel like it's broken.
Hmm. The system more broadly in the United States is under a lot of structural forces right now that are really out of our control. Our system was set up with a number of checks and balances. Those are a bit out of whack. Our elected officials are far older than the average age of the population, which also feels a bit out of whack. And representative democracies, as you know, tend to give greater power to smaller population states. And because of our polarization in our politics right now, that's caused some representatives and members of the Senate to have very small populations that they represent, so an outsized voice against larger states like Pennsylvania, California, New York. And it's not limited to the United States. This is happening in other representative democracies around the world too. Places like Australia, Argentina, Japan are also suffering from this challenge of a disconnect between the rural landscape and the urban one, even the United Kingdom. Essentially, what's happened in rural counties is that a population has been left behind, a population that no longer really fits into the fabric of America or the fabric of society like it once did. These places tend to be far older than the average population. They tend to be poorer. They tend to be relatively monocultural. Um, they tend to have lost kind of their reason for being. And because of that, there's quite a bit of anger that exists there. And when that anger bubbles up and manifests in an outsized voice, it can cause the system to be somewhat out of whack.
So when it comes to the demographic destiny, as you allude to in your title, what does that mean with regards to our democracy and just more broadly, I guess?
Well, our democracy is really resilient. A lot of people think about um, federalism, being the three branches of government. That's how people tend to think of our federal government. Well, that's the three branches. But they often forget that our federalism goes horizontal as well as vertical. So there's three branches at the top, three branches in the middle, and three branches at the bottom. So there are lots of checks and balances that come into play. I actually have a lot of faith in our representative democracy withstanding this period of disruptive change. The question is, will our populations? Because there are a lot of decisions that are being put on hold right now that really need to be taken into account today, especially for vulnerable populations. You think about older people in this country. In 10 years, both the Social Security Trust Fund and Medicare start running out of money. Now, no one's going to stop receiving money from these programs in 10 years out. That's not the way this works. But their benefits are going to start paying out less and less over time. What this offers an opportunity for us to do, if we had a really robust and functioning republic right now, is that all social partners would come to the table and would say, let's negotiate. Let's take a look at the same period, like the New Deal era under Roosevelt or the Great Society era under Johnson, and let's think about how we can make society better. Well, when it comes to our economy, what this means of having too many older people in retirement is it starts putting a drag on society at large because Generation Z, Generation Alpha are smaller than the boomers, are smaller than the millennials. So we have fewer people that are coming into the workforce over time. One of the ways that we can solve this, and one of the ways that we can make things like Social Security and Medicare more robust, is to increase the age in which people take up these programs. Now, before your progressive hat gets too wound up about this, I'm not one who believes should take a sledgehammer to open a walnut. I'm not one that believes that a blanket raising of the retirement age makes sense either. But I do think it's incredibly disingenuous that our politicians on both sides of the aisle now are saying keep Social Security strong, yet no one's offered a really serious policy proposal to do anything about it yet. I think that's really disingenuous. On the other hand, I do think that there are some things that we can do. I think that there are professions in particular and certainly an income class of people that can't afford to work longer and do work longer already. They're our highest income earners. And if they are working longer, should they really take up Social Security as a benefit later in life? Probably not. But if you're a bricklayer, a factory worker, and you've done this repetitive work for most of your career, and your body is starting to give out, and you can't work any longer, well, you should be able to take up the benefits at the traditional retirement age. Um, we have to look at public policy less as a one size fits all and a one size fits me or a one size fits you, because that's the way we get to be, I think, in many ways, more equitable for the future.
Yeah, and just to put on my progressive hat and my CPA hat, and this is not to argue. It's just it is to point out, like, look, um, I advocate for the expansion of Medicare, the expansion of Social Security, the expansion of Medicaid. But at the same time, you can't then just say, well, we're not going to touch the tax code. We're not going to like do any of these
Mhm.
other pieces over here. And that's kind of what I think you're alluding to. It's saying, like, if you want to expand Social Security, you have to increase the, well, unless you believe in modern monetary theory, but that's a whole nother can of worms. But you have to expand your tax base in some capacity. And if you're unwilling to come to the table and negotiate what those things are, then you're not going to be able to actually promote the solution.
Well, and here's the choice. The choice is actually very simple. Like, are we comfortable walking outside of our homes and seeing a woman in her 80s on the street in poverty? I, for one, am not. I'm not up for that.
Yep.
I don't like seeing it, and I occasionally see that on the streets here of Washington, D.C. Um, I don't want that to be our future. Women are at highest risk of falling into poverty in later life. It's just the way the system was set up. It's not their fault. But that is the way the system is set up, and that's why there are more women in senior poverty than men.
With regards to younger population, how does this aging really kind of impact? I'm 27, so how does
Hmm.
this impact to people that are maybe I'm the last piece of the
I was going to say
millennials.
you're the last millennial, aren't you?
That's actually the name of my movie that's coming out in no. uh that's I joke about that because I was born in 96, right? So yes, I am the last
Yeah.
millennial. And my brothers are Gen Z. We're inheriting basically this economy that is quite different than our parents. My parents are old Gen X, so
Hmm.
like almost baby boomers. So
Yeah.
how does this shifting dynamic affect us more in the economic sense, and then we could go to a political sense as well, because I definitely have opinions more on the political side than on the economic side. But
Okay. On the economic side, it's very simple. If there are too many people out of work and not enough people working, that's it causes what's known as an imbalance in the dependency ratio, and that's a technical term, but it basically means too many people are taking and too few people are giving. That's boiled down into the simplest of terms. When that happens, the economy starts to drag. There aren't enough people paying taxes. There aren't enough people consuming goods and services. There aren't enough people purchasing houses. Everything kind of grinds to a halt. And when that happens, it gets really ugly really quick. What I am excited about is that late millennials and certainly Gen Z believe in institutions. They believe in government. They believe in the future. Their optimism is almost unbridled, and their ability to together as a unit um, is shocking. Um, in many ways, this generation looks surprisingly like my grandparents' generation, and my grandparents were members of the greatest generation, born into poverty, suffering through not only the years of the First World War, but the Great Depression, the Spanish flu, the Second World War, and then building these institutions in an era of prosperity that really we've coasted on, and the boomers coasted on for their entire lives. Gen X didn't coast as much on that. We still are dealing with some challenges in being the middle child between boomers and millennials. But millennials have been really handed a bag of goods, and Gen Z even more so. So I think that Gen Z's collective action is one that gives me hope. Another thing that actually gives me hope, Connor, is demographic change. So I guarantee you everyone's heard the term quiet quitting and the great resignation. That is a byproduct of demographic change. And you're going to say, wait. How does that happen? Well, there were a total of 76 million baby boomers walking this planet at one point. Today, there's 69 million. So 7 million of them have passed on. There are only 69 million Gen Zs. During COVID, we lost 3 million extra people to retirement, older people to retirement, than we would have in a normal year. We didn't have enough Gen Zs to fill those roles. So guess what happens? Salaries go up, wages increase, benefits improve, schedules change, flexibility becomes something that's a negotiating tactic within the office place. These are good things, and these can actually contribute to narrowing the wage gap when government does not choose to intervene.
I kind of love talking about that dynamic shift and the empowering of the average worker specifically. I think in understanding our collective. I mean, I don't know if you can see this, Bradley. Behind me, it says "support your local union" behind me
Mm-hmm.
on my wall here. Like these dynamic shifts are definitely ideological with the age dynamic. Have you
Mm-hmm.
seen a shift in um or what might feel like a political realignment kind of happening with this shift in demographic? Now, I don't know, that might be something that I'm kind of feeling out, but have you?
I think you might feel it in Pennsylvania. I don't think you'd feel it in Montana. I think you might feel it in New York. You wouldn't feel it in South Carolina. I think it really depends on where you sit in the country. Also, the number of rural counties that you have, because rural counties are very conservative
Mhm.
on the whole, and they stay relatively old. Unless you have, in a state like Pennsylvania, the two big cities of Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania on either side that have a pretty large voice in the state's electorate for statewide office and national office, you're not going to necessarily see that in other states. But truth be told, if Gen Z didn't show up to vote in that last election, that would have been Trump's election.
Mhm.
There's no question about that. So the national politic, yeah, I think to some degree you're absolutely right. There is a realignment happening here, um, but it was bound to happen. Realignments happen from time to time. What's really exciting, though, Connor, is that this group, I alluded to the fact that they're starting to behave a lot like the Greatest Generation. Their economic conditions are also like the Greatest Generation too. For the Greatest Generation from 1914 to 1945, they lived in pretty terrible economic conditions. They came out into a world in which the economy was humming along. Uh, there were fewer of them around, and during that period, we saw greater workforce participation on the whole. Unions were the strongest they had ever been. In fact, older worker participation, at least in the recorded time, was as high as it's ever been. In fact, 1 out of 2 men over the age of 65 was working back then, and they were working because it was a good deal for them.
Mhm.
It was a good deal to stay employed, not because they wanted to or they absolutely needed to. It was a good deal. So now it's becoming a good deal to stay in work for longer periods of time. So we're seeing two things happen here. We're seeing an increase in labor force participation rates of the younger people that have really fallen out of the workforce, those 16 to 24s. And we're starting to see a real increase in the people who are over 65 in the workforce again. That's a sign of a really strong economy. And that's actually going to push us closer and closer towards closing some of those gaps on income.
I hope so. As wealth inequality is one of my biggest ones, and I have some concerns about older people working, and personal opinions, but
Mm,
that's besides the point for our discussion today. Um,
mm,
I have a question in chat from a viewer that says, "Is it?" And you might not have this off the top of your head, so if you don't know, it's okay. It's kind of a random question, but this is on kind of the demographic shift, but also in comparison between not boomers or even older than boomers with millennials, but millennials and Gen Z. It says the question says, "Is it true that Gen Z's home ownership is actually better than millennials?" And I don't know. I haven't seen anything in comparison of that. But if you
I,
do you know
I would
anything
ha-
about that?
I would have to dig into the data to give you a solid answer one way or the other. But I can tell you this: on the whole, average age of home ownership has been going up.
Mm-hmm.
So the likelihood of that seems pretty hard to believe. In fact, last year alone, the average age of a first-time home buyer jumped from 33 to 36. The average age of a second-time home buyer was 59.
Jeez.
So the chances of, Gen Z doing better than millennials, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's harder for me to believe without looking at the data. Um, but as boomers pass on, as boomers start passing wealth, and as boomers start selling off their homes, there are likely going to be more homes available and more home affordability in the future too. It's just a waiting game. And I know that's not a great answer for people who are struggling to get by right now, who are struggling to buy their first house, build a family, but these things do change. It just takes time for them to change. And even if we wanted to build, thousands of units tomorrow, and we could, it wouldn't necessarily solve all the problems.
Yeah, I just bought my first house this past summer, and it was like the luck of. I mean, I'm Irish, so the luck of the Irish, right? And it was just
Yep.
like I really got lucky and stepped in shit really to and just ran with it. My mom is a realtor, so I just know like it being a big difference between the millennials and boomers. That's an interesting question to look at there as we move
Yep.
forward. Um, with regards to we'll jump to President Biden.
Hmm.
I actually do want to kind of just highlight for people that, and I talked about Bradley. You don't know this about me, but I ran for state representative in 2022, and I almost won. Um, and in one of my speeches, I highlighted that President Biden was elected to the United States Senate when he was so young that he wasn't able to take the office yet. He was 29 years old. He had to wait until he turned 30 to take the office. So
Hmm.
now, if elected, President Biden would be the oldest elected president in the history of the country. So
Correct.
tell me a little bit about that shift in why is it that we're so open into an older president? What does he represent in that kind of dynamic shift? And frankly, do you think he can get that job done as an older dude?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that I know the reality is that age-based measures are kind of silly.
Hmm.
They do nothing to suggest the cognitive competence of a person, their mental health or physical health, their ability to just get the job done. That is in large part judged by years of experience, which he certainly has.
Hmm.
And we can certainly judge him on his years of experience, and make an assessment from there. But so what? He's 80. Benjamin Franklin was playing an active role in American politics until he died at the age of 84. So this is not something that's necessarily new. What's new for Americans is that there are so many older people around and so many older people that are sitting in these governance roles. In fact, the fastest growing demographic in this country today are people over the age of 85. So get used to it. There's going to be a lot more older people around, and they're going to occupy these roles for longer periods of time. I think there is a concern that's raised, and I think it's a right concern that's raised about cognitive health later in life. And I do think it is important that people maintain regular screenings with their doctors, make sure that they have advisors on staff that are really watching out for their best interests at the end of the day. One of the stories that perhaps hasn't played nationally, but certainly has played here in Washington and definitely in California, is the health of Senator Feinstein. And Senator Feinstein has been, I guess I can say, because it's in the popular media, accused of suffering from dementia. Obviously, her shingles have been very public. She's not well.
Hmm.
And because she's not well, she's not able to govern. If people are not physically or mentally or cognitively well, they probably shouldn't be governing. The good thing about the president is that there are a number of checks in place. So the president every morning, I know this because there are people that I know that work at the White House. He goes for a physical exam every morning. He gets his mental health, his physical health, his cognitive health checked. If there was something wrong, the doctor would flag it. We also have these protections under the 25th Amendment that if something was wrong and the president was in fact incapacitated, the cabinet and then the Congress could remove him. So if we needed to do that, so I feel like we're kind of good there. Our problem is as a society is that former presidents have lied to us about their mental health before, their physical health before, including the previous president, Donald J. Trump, and President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. So I think we're a little anxious about the truth telling here. I, for one, know that President Biden is healthy. I trust in his own decision making and his own family and advisors around him to really be watching out for us.
Thank you for bringing up Ronald Reagan in that. So I didn't have to, because that is something that people overlook. And look,
Yeah,
longtime listeners and viewers of the show, it's it is not like a secret that I have no love lost for Ronald Reagan, and the direct lineage of Reagan, well, Nixon to Reagan to Trump is pretty clear.
it's
Um,
a direct line. Yeah.
right. So I appreciate you highlighting that, and also talking about Dianne Feinstein, which I talked about last week. Just as that's growing in concerns for the Democrats to govern.
Yeah, I think for the Democrats, if people aren't aware, and I imagine most of your listeners are, it's essentially holding up judicial nominees now.
Hmm.
Not much legislative work is getting through. The big stuff isn't getting through right now simply because we're living in divided government. But the one place where you can knock stuff through pretty quickly is the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, and that's just not happening. And that's problematic. Trump was very good at getting judges through.
Yes, he was, unfortunately, on many different levels. So I have another question in chat, and then I have a couple follow up questions for you. This one's not less so about demographic shifts, but it's more about health. The question is: would you consider John Fetterman, our senator here in Pennsylvania, as
Mhm.
another example of people not trusting the health of politicians, as reported, I
Yes.
suppose?
Yeah, I mean, from my vantage point, both Senator Fetterman and his wife Giselle were not perfectly transparent about the senator's stroke, and then subsequent health conditions. Um, my father had a stroke.
Hmm.
It's a very embarrassing thing to go through, and I don't think that most people realize the amount of rehabilitation that it actually takes to get somebody back to normal. And I'm using air quotes here because normal is subjective. It's completely subjective. And what you don't often realize is that even though a person who has suffered a stroke might not seem cognitively with it, they're just processing at a different pace. They're processing in a different way. And sometimes you'll find that there is a disconnect between somebody saying something and then the response. And in fact, as you notice, John Fetterman now works with a translator, essentially a visual translator, so he can process what people are saying at a better rate. That's not going to impede his ability to govern. It's not going to impede his decision making in any way. But it does impede, I think, trust. And so much of our belief in our political leaders is centered on trust. And it's also the easiest thing to lose that I wonder if he'll be able to get back on board. When Fetterman was mayor of Braddock years ago and then became lieutenant governor of the state, I said, that man's going to be president. Well, I don't think that's possible today. And it's not because of his stroke, it's because it wasn't transparency. Transparency is the one thing, that level of trust, building that level of trust with the people is the one thing that can really carry people through. You lose that and you lose elections.
I think that's a fair assessment. It's unfortunate. I do find myself feeling the same way, and I was very inspired by. I met John Fetterman back in 2015. I'm a big Bernie Sanders supporter, so I
Mhm.
met him at a rally at Penn State where I went undergrad, and I'm Fetterman was there campaigning for his first Senate run. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty transparent about it. I voted for Malcolm Kenyatta in the primary, and Malcolm's a friend of the show, so it's not for anything other than just saying like it seems there were some changes there, and that transparency thing is important too.
Yeah.
Um, so this is I think a more of a tougher nut to crack for me personally. I feel, and I'm going to phrase it in the best way I possibly can. But as a young person, be with ambition, with drive to make political change happen, how do we build a coalition with the older generations without saying solely it's our time now? Which I want to be fair, like that's what I want to say. I want to
Yeah.
say it's look, you guys had your time, now it's our
You had
time.
your chance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
lot
I mean,
of
every
go ahead.
listen, every young generation since the start of recorded history has come in and said it's time for me to take over. Get out of the way, old man. Um, and there's good record of it in both Greco and Roman times. that this is a constant in our society. Simply pushing out people out of the way, though, doesn't work.
Hmm.
And in fact, we are moving into an era. In fact, we're really in it in a number of different industries, certainly the federal government, where five generations of people are working together. And if we don't figure out a way to bridge these divides well and quickly, we're going to start seeing more stuff sputter out. So, how to do it? Well, there are some key issues in which the generations seem to have commonality. In fact, in my book, The Super Age, I talk about the BLM protests. And you'll find that there was great polarity in the types of people that were showing up at those protests. And the reason we know this is because obviously the cell phone companies collect data on where we are based on geolocation. And what they found was it was older adults, people over the age of 55, 65, that were at these rallies, and people under the age of 35. It was the 35 to 50-year-olds that were sitting out. Now, why were they sitting out? Well, likely because they were working at that time or they were involved in some type of family caregiving or something along those lines. But what's interesting is something that is so focused on social justice, like George Floyd, really pulled the generations together. I think you're starting to see more of the generations linking together around environmental action as well. And I think there's something to get excited about there because I think boomers are pretty aware that they're not leaving the planet in the best shape possible. And there is a cohort within this generation, a fairly significant one, that does believe that the environment is something that we should fix or at least attempt to fix quickly. My own parents, my mother has become an avid composter. Everything goes in the right place, almost to the extreme, almost to the extreme. But because of that, there are these threads that you can start stitching together to start weaving together, I think, a cohesive coalition. Now, there's also the issue of abortion. I mean, have we ever seen people unite around an issue so quickly as abortion? I predict quite a lot for my job. That's what strategic foresight is. I would have never been able to predict. I'll probably lose some clients over this. I would have never been able to predict the sheer amount of reaction against the Roe v. Wade decision. Never would have been able to predict it. And, this might be the unseating of a number of different Republicans because of that. It doesn't play well. It doesn't play well. On the environmental issue, I'm sorry, on the economic issue, I think we're a little bit far apart on that still. And this is the area that I think requires the most effort, the most deliberate work, because we are going to have to, like I said at the onset of the show, we are going to have to renegotiate that social contract. And it's going to be up to all generations to come to the table and say, this is equitable, this is fair. Because as a progressive, you know that ensuring some type of healthcare, ensuring some type of retirement security, especially when we become disabled, is a pillar of our society. To see that go away would be a crime. So how do we get to a point where we can agree, even if we agree to disagree, that there are changes that need to be made and make them incrementally? Because it's simply not fair that we have about 210 million people, 220 million people right now paying into Social Security, and they're not gonna see it, the full benefit. That's almost 2/3 of the country. That doesn't seem fair at all.
That won't happen if I have anything to say about it. God damn it.
Well, and then there's the question, and I've warned I've warned the organizations that focus on the older population in particular that what happens if Gen Z, millennials, and boomers say, actually, we're just going to figure out Social Security on our own.
Huh.
Well, there's enough of them that they could do that. And what's the math there? And I don't think that these organizations that have been very protective of the status quo have really considered that in their equation. I don't think they've taken that into their math. And I could, I can foresee Gen Zs and millennials at least saying, burn it to the ground and we'll start all over again. We'll start from scratch. And you know what? That'd be a pretty scary thing if you're a 75-year-old pensioner and that's your main source of income. That would be pretty scary. But it could be possible if the coalition is built right.
I I hope it doesn't have to require that, but I mean, Look, there are no pensions for millennials. There are no pensions for Gen Z. Those don't exist. That word doesn't exist for us. So I bet you if you went and polled Gen Z that they don't even most people don't even know what a pension is in that generation.
I wouldn't say that they would know what a pension is. They do seem to have an understanding of Social Security, that
Yeah.
it's there but elusive. I also would say that Gen Z is really kind of like knocking us around. Maybe not for you so much because you're a young millennial. Their savings rates are through the roof,
Hmm.
for their income, against their income, and that to me is remarkable. This is where it gets back to the past is prologue. Their savings rates look like my grandparents' savings rates.
Yep.
They're able to put money aside, they're investing, they're hustling, they're working multiple jobs. Like, this is a generation that's here to work. So anyone who ever says to me, Gen Z is just a bunch of slackers, well, coming from the slacker generation, I can tell you decidedly Gen Z is not. They're hustlers, and they are here to build a better world.
Yeah. Yes, I completely agree. And I just meant like more so that pension part of it's disconnected
Yeah,
from
yeah,
Social
yeah,
Security.
yeah. Yes, the state pension and the corporate pension.
Right.
Yeah, like
Exactly.
those don't exist. Those
And
don't exist.
exactly. And I'm an accountant, so trust me, like I totally see that connection to savings and all that stuff. I have a few questions here left in chat, and then I'll give you one more on from my end. Um,
Sure.
we have a question that says, what type of strategies do you use or do you think we can use to target Gen Z and that 85 plus cohort at the same time? I think that's a tough question, but are there
Are
strategies?
we talking broadly about politics?
It's a open-ended question, so you could kind of run
Yeah,
with it how you like.
and this is where my capitalist hat comes on, because I actually think the best place that we can engage all the generations is actually in the workforce, because that's where we made some big mistakes of essentially putting older people out to pasture at 65. All this was done with good intent. FDR and the New Deal were all really well thought out, but they didn't take into account longevity gains. And the reality is, in 1935, average life expectancy in this country was, I think, closer to 55. Yet retirement age was 65. Well, now retirement age is 76. We've been slipping the past few years due to COVID and to gun violence. Um, but that's still, you're going to get 10 years on average. And what people often don't realize is that their life expectancy goes up the longer they are alive. So when you hit, like, for example, I'm 45 years old, my life expectancy at birth was, I think, closer to 73. And now my life expectancy is closer to 80. So, this kind of goes hand in hand. But at work in particular, I think there's a real interesting thing that's happening naturally, is that we're coming back together because we need to come back together. We have to work together. We don't have much choice. And within a work environment, and perhaps in a political or an organizing environment, we're starting to see mutual mentorships come into play. And these are natural relationships between elders and youngsters, where elders kind of share what's worked and what hasn't in the past. And the youngers are able to illustrate, perhaps new ways of doing things. And when you bring those two skill sets together, something really beautiful happens, is that there's a spiller effect in terms of finding out what's working and making sure you don't duplicate effort. Efficiencies come into play, believe it or not, bringing two disparate groups together. And time again, and every organization that's worth its salt has found this, from Gensler to McKinsey, has found that age is a component of diversity, and diverse organizations would manage in an inclusive way actually outperform those that don't by upwards of 30%. So bringing an age into the equation is no different than bringing in race or gender identity, and sexual orientation. Like, those are part of what makes us us. And when you have those different components of the table, you just do better. You're more compassionate. You have greater empathy, and you can figure out, I think, solutions that are a lot less about us versus them and more about us as we.
I couldn't agree more with that, and I think it goes beyond. And people that have watched or listened to the show know I have like a kind of uh animosity towards the performative diversity inclusion, and more so like want that what you're talking about, where it's like we're actually
Yeah.
bringing people to the table, we're putting
Hmm.
diverse people onto diverse types of people onto boards of directors and giving them
Hmm.
opportunities within an organization to lead and work together, rather than just like look like every corporation does like a pride flag now, right? Like
Oh, sure.
which is just
Well,
to me performative, versus like no, we're actually going to look for gender equity, we're going to look for sexual orientation equity on and representation on a number of different levels.
yeah, there's a saying in the South, it's called putting lipstick on a pig. And that's what a lot of DEI programs look like. You can't have diversity and equity without inclusion. Inclusion is the central component that ties everything together. Um, and that's where, for me, and the second part of my business, inclusion really is a big part of it. Not only building inclusive companies with benefits that actually represent the people that are within these companies, but also building inclusive spaces. Our world is just not built for the diversity of people that live here, and our regulatory environment has really failed the vast majority of people living with disability in this country.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And I look at the ADA, Social Security, Medicare. These are like some of the greatest achievements in American history. So we can't let them die, basically.
Yeah, and the thing is, they just haven't kept up with time. I mean, I know that it probably sounds so simplistic to say that, but they just haven't kept up with time. The last major revision to Social Security was over 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot has changed in 40 years. A lot has changed. The last major update to Medicare was during the Bush 2 administration. Like we're not making the adjustments we need to in order to keep these programs solvent. And if we don't, they break. I mean, that's the simple case. It's up to the electorate to really keep the pressure on at the end of the day if we want the change. If we're fine with things falling apart, let it fall apart. But it's on us. It's not just about the people here in Washington. It's on us.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we might have to get coffee or a beer and discuss what our solutions might be. Again, like I have my solutions, but so I have one more question for you, and this one has really nothing to do with anything that we've talked about today. It is something that
Okay.
I like to ask any guest that comes on, and I have the time to ask, and it is what is one book that you've read in your life that other than your own book, because you wrote that, um a book that you read in your life that has changed your perspective or has really impacted your work, your life. I mean, it could just be something as stupid. I mean, I give examples of like everything from, for me, from the assassination of Fred Hampton to I read Thor comic books every week, right? So there's
Yeah.
everything in between.
Yeah, I mean, the one book that just jumps in my mind, there's two actually, and they're both children's books, but the one that really sticks in my head is Little Engine That Could. And I know that sounds so reductive, but it is a book that teaches about perseverance and overcoming adversity. And it's so important that we instill those values in children today in particular, because it sometimes doesn't feel like they're getting them. The same way maybe we did when we were younger. Um, you know, we have to move away from, this will probably sound really, really conservative of me to say, but we have to move away from, the universal trophy giving society to one that rewards people who are actually putting in effort, that are really putting in the time and really putting in um, the pain and the energy to get things done, and yeah, that's the one of all books. I wasn't expecting that, but there you go. That's what jumped into my head.
And hey, we can blame the boomers for the trophies. For everyone get so, look.
Hey, man,
they're
I
the
know.
they're the ones that did it, not us. We didn't ask for that.
They gave them to us.
All right. That's what I had for you today. So Bradley Schurman, you guys can get the book. It's called The Super Age: Decoding Our Demographic Destiny. And Bradley, where can everyone else find you, whether that be social media or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you can find the book on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and sometimes in your local bookstore. You can find me at thesuperage.com. Most of the content that I produce is available on LinkedIn at Bradley Schurman. That's spelled Schurman. But yeah, reach out with your questions. I'd love to answer them. I'd love to engage you more.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Connor. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. And when you come to Bucks County, let me know, and we can have those political debates about what we want to do about Social Security.
Yeah, and let me know when you make it down to DC for the next protest.
All right, I will do. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Now we get to dive into some of the political drama of the week, some of the losers of the week, maybe some might say. And I'm just adjusting everything here real quick. But biggest story, my opinion, has been not that Joe Biden has announced his presidential campaign, because that is a big story, but the fact that right-wing provocateur Fox News anchor, or should I say former Fox News anchor, bow tie wearing Tucker Carlson, has been canned, fired, let go from Fox News. Now, we don't have all of the details yet. And I'm glad this is on a day that I had a guest, because this is not going to be this gigantic, super long, ranty section. But I think that we can all have a collective cheering, as Lindsay's doing in the chat with some confetti. We can have some crabs going in the chat, like dancing on the beach. Although he didn't, he's not gone. He's just gone from Fox News. We could have the dancing lobsters from the Amanda Show. Tucker Carlson is identified throughout the Dominion lawsuit for a number of different reasons. And of course, if you recall from last week or 2 weeks ago, the Dominion lawsuit was around the election denialism promoted by Fox News. Tucker Carlson being one of the largest proponents of that. Now, that's one piece of the potential, and we could probably loop back next week or in 2 weeks or whenever this stuff starts to leak out. But Tucker was talking about that. He was telling people to lie under oath about that. He was texting people about the stock price dropping and saying all this stuff about Sidney Powell, who was Trump's lawyer. He was doing all these things behind the scenes. That's the one part. That's the Dominion lawsuit. In this lawsuit also then came out leaked texts about other legal matters and other matters more broadly, mainly including a new lawsuit that is alleging unfair wage compensation, unsafe basically workplace environment at Fox News for staffers, for people that work on the show of Tucker Carlson specifically. But then there's also texts that came out regarding Rupert Murdoch, I believe it's Rupert Murdoch, that basically it was Tucker kind of shit-talking management. And then there's also texts that leaked that said that Tucker Carlson hates Trump. Hates Trump. Now, speaking of the devil, you can't go one episode nowadays without having at least one video of failed former President Donald J. Trump. So let's take a look here. An interview he did on Newsmax the day that Tucker Carlson was fired.
My honor. So Tucker Carlson was sitting here 2 weeks ago interviewing you. He's gone. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm shocked. I'm surprised. He's a very good person, a very good man, and very talented, as you know, and he had very high ratings. So
I'll pause it right there just to say that it is some. it should be noted, as I'm stumbling upon myself here because I'm excited, that Tucker Carlson was fired on a Monday morning after signing off on a Friday night show talking about people eating bugs. Um, but he signed off the show completely saying like, yep, I'll see you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend, blah, 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 right? And there obviously is something beyond all the things that I listed out that is more serious as to why Tucker Carlson was fired, because nobody would have expected him to just be boom gone. It's also worth noting that Tucker Carlson had the highest rated cable news show in the country. So for them to fire him, Fox News is literally losing money. They're just throwing money away. Now, I think it's a net positive for society, but for the company, they're actually going to lose money because of it. Now, Newsmax supposedly has seen an uptick. I was just watching CNN actually while I was eating dinner. Yeah, call me a liberal cuck or whatever. But I was watching CNN and they were talking about this, and they were saying how Newsmax has actually seen a shot up in ratings for the 8 o'clock slot where Tucker was. Now, Tucker Carlson hasn't moved yet. He hasn't gone to Newsmax or OAN or Rumble or YouTube or any of these places yet. So we don't know where that'll end up. But having the highest rated cable television show doesn't really directly lead to the most logical jump. Say he's going to get fired. And in the chat is cuck a normal insult that's thrown at you? It's not thrown at me, but if you engage online as a male, people, especially if you're a leftist, liberal, left of center, that's usually like the woke liberal cucks who don't want you to do this, and they want to take my Bud Light and give it to Dylan Mulvaney, and they're taking away the sexy boots off of the M&Ms. That's Tucker Carlson. That was my tweet when Tucker got fired. How am I going to know which beer companies to be mad at and which chocolate mascots are triggering? Because they're PC. But let's continue.
We're just learning about it almost as we speak. You and I just said, wow, that was something. That's a big one. I don't know if it was voluntary or was it somebody fired. But I think Tucker's been terrific. He's been...
Tucker, I hate to do this to you. I really do. You're a good guy. You're really talented. I really like the bow tie. But unfortunately, you're fired. They should have brought Trump in to do the firing.
Especially over the last year or so, he's been terrific to me.
There's a lot of turmoil over there at Fox. I mean, $787 they just paid. Why would they get rid of a guy who's performing? Why would somebody do that to their business? It's good to see you.
So it's a legit question. I am excited to find out more. And we will find out more. I will pinpoint this here because I've talked about it with DeSantis. We talked about it at work today, actually, and how DeSantis is going after Disney. And I remind you guys all of this. Politics is a lot of... We hold politicians and we hold media outlets and we hold personalities up to this higher standard, right? And say like, okay, they're doing this for X, Y, or Z reason. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes these people are just egomaniacs, egotistical, and they are just driven by spite. And look, Trump doesn't seem that upset that Tucker Carlson lost his job. I also have to point this out because there are this weird strain of people on the left that are like, well, at least Tucker Carlson's anti-war. No. Tucker Carlson is anti-Ukraine versus Russia war because he, for whatever reason, finds it profitable to engage in what functions as Russian propaganda. But I will remind everybody that is watching this, whether you're on the left, right, or center, that Tucker Carlson built his media personality on defending and promoting the invasion of Iraq, which was a country that, spoiler alert, did not attack us on 9/11. It was a scapegoat for the folks that were actually from Saudi Arabia that hijacked that hijacked the planes on 9/11. And I'm not advocate because I'm actually anti-war. I wouldn't have advocated for an invasion of Saudi Arabia because these were not lone wolves. These were terrorists within an organization that are separate from the government. Although there is still connections to those governments. But completely ignoring all of that, Tucker Carlson was for the invasion of Iraq. And I made the suggestion to some of my classmates over the weekend, but I will make it to you as well. There's a book by Naomi Klein called The Shock Doctrine. If you have not read that book, that should be put on the number one of your list. You should read The Shock Doctrine, listen to it on Audible, or get it from your local library, because that book will explain to you the real reasons of the invasion of Iraq. And Tucker Carlson was just a useful idiot for promoting that on TV. Now, as I talked about the CNN network earlier, Don Lemon, as Donald Trump puts it, but Don Lemon, who used to have, I believe, the 9 o'clock slot, with another anchor that got, canceled, Chris Cuomo, coming right after him, I think. Don Lemon has also now been fired from CNN. It was like a bloody Monday for media personalities. We have Tucker losing his job, Don Lemon losing his job, and failed comedian and Arthur actor Steven Crowder announcing that he's getting divorced by his wife after losing his bout with the Daily Wire because of his contract going to crap with the Blaze. I mean, media is crazy. But Don Lemon's departure from CNN is not one that I have a particular feeling about. Don Lemon is not a hot take generator. He is not a thought leader, in my opinion. He is a pretty milquetoast, slightly left of center personality. He had good charisma for TV, and that's kind of what you would expect. But he said a few things on air that seemed to be, yes, as Jordan alludes to, is a misogynist pig. Now, I don't know if I would go so far as to say he's a misogynist pig, but he has said misogynist things, and he definitely, he basically said misogynist things a number of different times, most recently about Nikki Haley, and I know behind the scenes, he was fighting with Caitlin Collins, who's kind of like an up-and-coming anchor for CNN. Yes, as Lindsay's pointing out, saying they're past their prime. That is Nikki Haley specifically, but he has said it a few times. He has said it about another person as well. Off the top of my head, I can't remember because it was further back, but I know specifically about Nikki Haley, which, by the way, Nikki Haley is young for politics, very young for politics in general, but she's not going to win the presidency, but young for the Senate, governor. Well, she was already governor, president, all that stuff, right? So it's not like I have any love lost for Don Lemon, and as CB chat, he is now Don Lime. And no, I wouldn't say he's a cuck. That's not how. I don't call people cucks, to be clear. That is not my lingo. I always throw that out in my impersonations because that is what, if you engage with the alt-right, or the alt-right doesn't really exist anymore, but the far right online, that's what they will call you. But that being said, let's dive into the last piece here, and that is about Joe Biden running again. So as me and Bradley talked about, there is a changing dynamic, and I hope you guys enjoyed that guest. I actually had a good time interviewing him, and I definitely have differences there in what my interpretations are. I actually don't think it's a good thing that people have to work when they're older. I think that people should be able to enjoy their lives, and I think that fewer people should be uh, working the majority of their lives. I think you should try to be able to live, but that's maybe that's the radical notion of the dreaming of a better America. But besides that point, we talked about Biden announcing his um, presidency, or sorry, his candidacy for his second term. I want to dissect dissect what we already talked about from what I want to talk about here. In the Discord server, we had a little discussion. It was only a brief discussion, but I want to emphasize what my real opinion is on this election. So, and in the chat, I have a question that says, who is the anti-war candidate? Now, if you're talking about anti-war candidates for president or for a different position, please throw the rest of what you are asking in the chat, because I don't think that there has been an anti-war president other than a presidential candidate other than Bernie Sanders in the last 16 years, at least. So you could throw the rest of that question in there, because I don't think there is an anti-war candidate. But with that being said, the question around Joe Biden and looking at progressive challengers to his presidency. And I've seen a lot of folks throw out this, oh, we should have a primary, we should have debates, we should have all this stuff. And I think for small d democracy, those things are great. And I think that, frankly, there is a primary happening, but it is not going to be as robust because parties want to protect their incumbents. That's a given, right? The same way that Trump didn't have primary in 2020, the same way that we probably won't see a major primary in the Democratic Party. Now, disconnect what reality is and what I think should be, okay? I actually don't think that there is a progressive candidate today that could or should use the time to run for president to challenge Joe Biden, because I think it is political suicide, one. And two, I don't think that there is a constituency that is behind them that Biden basically needs to chip off to win. If Bernie Sanders, who has already said, no, I'm not going to run, I'm endorsing Joe Biden, if he was going to run, if Elizabeth Warren was going to run, if any of these major political progressive powerhouses, and I think those are the major two, to be honest with you, I can't really see others. In theory, it could be like one of the squad members, but they're not going to do that. If there's nobody that has the potential to really say, I'm going to take a giant chunk of this and say, you want my people to come vote for you, you got to give us the expansion of Social Security. You got to give us the expansion of Medicare. You got to give us student loan cancellation, not tied up in the Supreme Court, and actually pass legislation on it. Et cetera, down the line, right? Climate protections, not just the Inflation Reduction Act, which has been used as this pseudo-environmental bill. We want the Green New Deal or something like that. But that doesn't exist. That does not exist right now. And with regards to Patrick's time in chat, Trump is not anti-war. Trump literally bombed Syria and tried to mess around other parts of the Middle East that we may not be at war with. And he buddied up with Erdogan and with all these stuff in Turkey, and buddy with Putin. And people will say, oh, was no war with Ukraine with Russia, and that's because there wasn't a need for war between Russia and Ukraine at that point for them to take land. That's another story, okay? Trump didn't start his own war like the current president and all previous presidents. Biden didn't start the Ukraine-Russia war, first of all. That's a war that's frankly been basically going since 2014 with the invasion of Crimea. Syria was not... none of these are wars. They are whatever you want to call them. There was a civil war in Syria. Trump bombed an airport in Syria, which almost led to further escalation in the industry. Or sorry, not in the industry, in the area. So beyond that, the engagement between them and the bombing in Iran as well. Don't forget that. The breaking of the nuclear deal with Iran. Not Iran, Iran. And the Obama-Biden State Department did not overthrow Ukraine in 2014. That's not even worth engaging with. I'm sorry, but yes, and Lindsay points out in chat that we actually had to bail out the farming industry because of the trade war, the tariffs with China, et cetera, et cetera. And then he passed, not NAFTA, it's the new trade, whatever, and the CAFTA, whatever it is. Not even CAFTA. It's that new trade deal with Mexico, Canada, and America. I can't think of him off the top of my head, but that's not foreign policy. That is trade policy. It's slightly different. So there is, and I'm not going to engage beyond that, but there is no evidence that the State Department overthrew Ukraine in 2014, especially with the Russians invading Crimea. But all that's to say, as a progressive person, I don't see the positive coming from Biden engaging in it, or being forced to engage in a contested election, because there is no real contested election possibility, in my opinion. If there was one of these powerhouses that existed that could chip off 40%, even if they couldn't beat Biden, they could say, hey, I just want to push you to support X, Y, and Z. That's fine. In 2016, Bernie Sanders wasn't running to win. I hope we all can recognize that. Even though he was my candidate, I supported him outwardly. He was running to promote the issue, or awareness of the issue, and solutions to the issue of wealth inequality, which was never an issue that was addressed in the Democratic Party, and it most certainly was not addressed in the Republican Party, my friend Patrick. The Republican Party is a joke on these issues. The neoconservatives led the invasions of Iraq, of Afghanistan, the first Gulf War. You can go back and back and back and back. You can look at Friedman and the invasions and overthrowing of foreign sovereign governments, like in Chile. All this stuff ties to that neoconservative, neoliberal ideology. They're combined in this case. For those just listening, just pardon my bewilderment. There's a bit of nonsense in chat. I'm sorry. I'm trying to engage with it in good faith, but I shouldn't. All that is interesting. The possibility of a progressive frontrunner. I'm gonna address something in chat here real quick. My boy, because I'm assuming it's my guy, Patrick's time. I'm sorry if I'm misgendering you, but for those just listening, this is just an interesting thing, and I'll probably end after this. But he has suggested that most leftists today side with Bush and Cheney cronies. I'll unequivocally say it, that the Bush administration committed war crimes. They tortured people. People should have been punished for it. Oh my goodness. Mueller was in the Bush administration and the FBI. Yes, that doesn't make him a crony necessarily. And even if he was, that doesn't mean that his work with regards to Trump is thus irrelevant. This is a Patrick, you should have your own podcast and have me on as a guest. I would love to engage with you in a non crazy text way here. But for those at home, that is what I have for you today. I don't think that there should be a push to get a progressive to kind of commit political suicide, run against Biden, and get chewed up by the party. Now, that's not to say that I don't think that there should be a primary or that democracy is getting attacked or all this stuff. I think that the DNC, if there's people that can get to, a 10% or a 5% threshold, there should be a debate. And I agree that Biden is a snoozer, but it doesn't matter if he's a snoozer, because if you look at the opposition to Biden, he is running against people that fundamentally want to undercut our democracy, and in 2020 led an insurrection against our republic. And they do not care about the institutions. They do not support the institutions of our government. So if at a bare minimum we can extend the longevity of our country for 4 years by electing Joe Biden, I'm here for it. And to Jordan's point in chat, I have not found a time with Mr. Martino yet. We will probably be discussing if he will be willing to come on the show soon enough. So if he does, you guys will all be well aware of the fact that he will be coming on the show. As of right now, there is no scheduled interview of Mr. Paul Martino just yet. Although I am looking at also bringing on the Central Bucks School Board candidates, specifically Susan Gibson and Rick Herring, from under my supervision onto the show in the next couple of weeks. So this is a live audience. So this is as live as it could get. So this has been a good show, a fun show. I hope you guys all enjoyed watching / listening. Be sure to follow Bradley. Go check out his book. Maybe don't buy it on Amazon. I know he linked it on Amazon. Go buy it on Barnes & Noble or some other, if you can get it at your local bookstore, because F Amazon. That's my opinion. Not his. He is not saying that. So if anyone's listening because of that, you can blame me. With all of that being said, you could follow the show. Oh, wait, no. Don't follow the show anywhere else yet. You must hit that subscribe button. Smash, destroy, bash the like and the subscribe button to the channel. It helps us grow, and you can get live notifications for whenever a new video or our stream goes live. And hitting that like button really does help us get into the algorithm, and we get more interesting people like Patrick's Time coming into the chat. But all that too, you can follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And of course, we can use some suggestion always for videos and stuff like that, clips for TikTok. So if you ever, want to help the show, you can clip something of the show and send it. You can edit it. You can make drawings. You could do whatever you want. AI, that's cool. I used ChatGPT for the first time this week. It's interesting. And you can send it to me in our Discord server, which is linked in the description of this video and or podcast. You can join the discussion in our Discord server, and the more people we get in there, of course, the more robust of a conversation that we can have. So please feel free to join us in the Discord server. And if you would like to, you could support the show for as little as $3 a month on patreon.com/Greater Society Media. Now, with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys all. The chat has been very interesting. Patrick's time. Have a great evening. I hope to see you next week when I can engage with you even more. You are a total stable genius. With that, I'll see you guys next week. Take care. Peace.